Thanks a lot for joining us this afternoon. One might say an overdue conversation, especially when it comes to this issue around the National Register for Sex Offenders. Good time, I say, especially when it comes to making it public. Are we going to be seeing this being made public?
Certainly there is an intention to make it public, but that's a legislative process, so it has to go through Parliament. What we're currently busy with as the Department of Justice and Constitutional Development is consulting on amendments to the Sexual Offences Act to ensure that, firstly, we widen the definition of the people who are on the offenders list currently. So currently it only applies to people who have committed an offence against minors and children. We want to extend that to anyone who commits an offence against a sexual offence per se.
And also people who've got mental disorders, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so I have to ask you then, why? Why was there, if it's a person who's a sexual offender, why was it only sexual offenders against minors and people with a mental disorder? Because when you take into consideration that there's a diverse society as a whole, an individual, and I'm going to just use an individual like Faith, cannot have a perpetrator on the offenders list. That's a problem. Why?
Well, the question there really is, what is the status quo currently? So the status quo is you have a criminal record, which also reflects that one has committed a sexual offence. So essentially, the National Sexual Offences Register currently was promulgated to protect children, because you would find that an individual might then work in an environment where they have access to children or they have access to mentally disabled individuals. So the idea was the government normally runs those institutions. They would be able to then check if the said individual is, so to speak, eligible to work in that set environment. But the government has recognized that probably there's a debate around whether this should apply more widely. And some people have even said they want to know whether the guy at New Metro was previously a sexual offender. And that requires further debate, because there's further instances in history or even in other jurisdictions which have shown that sometimes mistaken identities can happen and can take hold. And we don't want to see a situation where then we have an element of vigilantism, as we've seen in other jurisdictions. So it's a very nuanced debate that still needs to happen in society. It's an important debate, but we recognize as government that it is something that we should work on. Look,
it's a very important debate. I mean, I'm just thinking of the fact that, yes, there is a case of mistaken or possibility of a mistaken identity. But on the status quo in itself, you're saying that an individual that's on the sexual offenders list, currently it's private, right? That means that who has got access to it? So typically speaking, a person who may be a sexual offender works in a creche with children. I'm an employer of that nursery school. Am I able to access that sexual offenders list to check if my potential employer is actually a sex offender?
That is precisely what the Sexual Offenders Register is for those specific industries and those specific environments. So you're not even supposed, you're actually obliged by law to actually obtain that information and ensure that you actually have people who have been adequately screened and who are, so to speak, clean enough to work in such an environment.
But I'd have to request it. So, for example, as an employer, currently, I'm going to have to make a request that actually I need to know if this person is on it.
Yes, indeed. As you would do with a criminal record as well. If it's in your interest to ensure that you know that someone who works in your environment doesn't have a criminal record. And by the way, the criminal record, as we speak currently, also depicts that one has committed a sexual offense. So it's not just bland, says this person has committed an offense. It's specific. It does say this individual has committed a sexual offense. And then you'd have to explain to society how you came to a conclusion that such a person is eligible to work with kids.
See, the mere fact that you are looking at even having a legislative process that's going to go into making it public basically says that maybe the need to make it public was there in the beginning. So then my question then is, how long is this process going to take? Because we all know we're very fantastic when it comes to policy and legislation and how we can conceptualize it, but implementation, we fall short time and time again, as we've evidently seen in this country.
So there's an important element in this debate as to say whether making it public in and of itself is a panacea. And that's a debate that needs to be held. So you would know that legislation, we don't draft legislation to just solve a particular problem, but we draft legislation to help posterity, to help society for future generations. And so a lot of consultation has to go into that process. But one of the timelines that we've set for ourselves to ensure that at least we have a good and solid draft bill which is adequately consulted upon. We've set a deadline for the end of this financial year to ensure that at least by the end of this financial year, society has adequately debated this matter, and we're all clear, because there's people as many people are for it, many people are also against it. And so there's two people on both sides of the fence on this matter.
Crispin, I'm sure that this is not going to be the last time that we have a conversation about this matter. What just the human part of it says that, you know, while we're calling it a debate, it's unfortunate that maybe somebody, as we're having a conversation, is being raped. And if they're being raped, maybe they're being raped by somebody who's actually on an offenders list and it could have been prevented.
But the question there, the point there is we have to ensure that the legislation that we have currently is adequately enforced and people are arrested. That is what will decrease crimes in society. The fact that you know that you'll be arrested for committing an offense. If you know that you won't be arrested, you'll try your luck. And that is the panacea, getting people arrested for the crimes that they commit, any crime.
I look forward to having this conversation again with you but of course that's why we have to leave it for this afternoon.